I want you to think about a highly specific kind of uncanny feeling. Have you ever walked a totally familiar route?
Oh, yeah.
Like maybe the commute you do every single day, but suddenly, out of nowhere, you get this prickle at the back of your neck.
Right.
And for just a second, the street feels completely alien, almost like you've arrived there from, I don't know, a totally different life.
Yes.
Or maybe you've walked into a room someone just stormed out of, and the air has this really heavy, evacuated quality to it.
A very visceral sensation, isn't it? You feel the residue of an event,
Yeah.
or maybe the anticipation of one, without anything actually physically changing in the space.
Exactly. And, we usually blame that feeling on bad sleep or maybe having way too much caffeine before leaving the house.
Sure.
But the stack of ancient philosophical sources we are taking a deep dive into today suggests we might actually be brushing up against something real in those moments.
We really might be.
We are looking at a collection of ideas surrounding an ancient concept, or rather a personified entity known as Leucoid,
Leucoid, yes.
the sovereign of the threshold. And our mission today is to explore what this entity and the actual spaces between things can teach us about our own identities.
And to even start to grasp this, we have to fundamentally shift how we think about mythology and ancient pantheons.
Okay, how so?
Well, normally human beings create gods to oversee very specific, tangible domains, right? You have gods of the ocean to explain the tides.
Right, or gods of the harvest for crop failure.
Exactly. Gods of the sky for thunderstorms. Those deities hold dominion over a territory, and that territory exists completely independently of them.
Like a mountain is still a mountain without a mountain god.
Precisely. But Leucoid operates completely differently. They are the personification of liminality itself.
So just the in-between.
Yeah, they represent the radical idea that the in-between isn't just a waiting room you have to sit in until you get to the next real place. The in-between is a destination in its own right.
But how does an entity like this even come to exist in the human imagination? Usually, as you said, gods are created to explain a physical phenomenon.
Right.
What human need created a god of the in-between?
Well, that's what makes the foundational philosophy here so striking. According to these early traditions, Leucoid wasn't created.
Wait, not created at all?
No, they weren't summoned or dreamed into being by some higher creator with a grand architectural design. They simply became.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, one of the most beautiful lines in the sources establishes their age by saying they existed before the forests learned their names.
Before the forests learned their names. Wow, so before categorization even existed.
Precisely. They're older than language,
Mm-hmm.
and because they predate the naming of things, they don't occupy physical objects. They occupy negative space.
Okay.
The sources describe this presence the way you might describe fog or a sudden drop in temperature.
Interesting.
The core teaching here is deeply disorienting to our modern brains, which is that emptiness is not the absence of presence. The cold is not merely the absence of warmth.
I have to pause on that because that is a massive conceptual leap.
It really is.
But if I try to map that onto something familiar, it makes me think of the physical silence baked into a music track, or negative space in visual art.
Yes, great analogy.
We tend to think of emptiness as a blank canvas just sitting there, completely passive, waiting for a painter to come along. But in this philosophy, Leucoid is the canvas. They're the awake emptiness.
That's a highly accurate way to frame it. The awake emptiness.
Where I get a little tripped up, though, is how the sources describe the architecture of this emptiness.
What do you mean?
Well, I saw references claiming that these between spaces have walls and a floor and a particular quality of light.
Right.
How can an in-between space be a room? By definition, isn't a threshold just a gap?
You're touching on the exact bias Leucoid acts as an embodied argument against. We're entirely conditioned to view transitions as non-spaces.
Yeah, I guess we are.
You're either in the hallway or you are in the room. You're either awake or you're asleep. Any moment in between is just a glitch in the matrix.
Right, a temporary error.
But this philosophy asserts that liminal spaces are entirely valid states of being. They aren't a consolation prize for not being somewhere else. They hold sovereignty.
Hence the sovereign of the threshold.
Exactly. So when the ancient thinkers talk about walls and a floor, they aren't talking about literal wood and stone. They are describing a bounded, sovereign reality.
So it's more of a perceptual room.
Yes, it's
Uh,
a perceptual condition that demands to be recognized as real, rather than just something you rush through to get to your destination.
Okay, so if we accept that this gap is an actual sovereign room, what actually happens to you when you step into it?
Yeah.
If you cross into this perceptual condition and come face to face with the entity that lives there, what does that look like?
You are meeting what these traditions call the faceless God. Though, interestingly, the philosophy often immediately corrects itself to clarify that Leucoid actually has every face, but wears none of them at once.
That's an eerie image.
It is. And to look at them is to see the version of yourself that lives just below the skin.
Wait, so you're talking about the completely blank, unassigned expression?
Yes, exactly.
Like when you accidentally catch your own reflection in a dark window or a powered-off TV screen before you have time to actually pose for yourself?
That is the exact face. It's the expression you make in the fraction of a second between waking up and remembering who you are.
Oh, man.
Before you remember your name, your job, your financial stress, your social standing. In Leucoid's presence, what the sources call your public architecture.
Public architecture. I like that phrase.
Yeah, all the careful ways you've built your personality for public consumption, it becomes completely transparent. You lose the comfortable distance you normally keep between yourself and your own self-knowledge.
I'm going to be honest, that sounds absolutely terrifying.
Oh, it's incredibly daunting.
Why would anyone want to experience that? Is this entity fundamentally a punisher? It sounds like an aggressive ego death where this god just tears down your life's work to show you how thick you are.
That reaction makes total sense because we spend so much energy building those public personas.
Mm-hmm.
But the philosophy makes a crucial distinction about the nature of revelation.
Which is?
Leucoid is not cruel. They do not use revelation as a weapon, and they are not a god of punishment. They are simply a condition where pretense cannot survive.
Okay.
Think of it less like a sledgehammer to your ego and more like an architectural stress test.
An architectural stress test? How so?
Well, when engineers apply extreme pressure to a building during a stress test, they aren't doing it maliciously to destroy the building.
Right, they want to see what holds up.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They're doing it to reveal exactly which walls are load-bearing and which walls are just decorative drywall. Leucoid applies that same pressure to your identity.
That makes a lot of sense.
Your public self isn't destroyed by them. It just becomes transparent. You can still see the decorative drywall you put up, and you can even choose to keep using it when you go back to your daily life.
But you can no longer mistake it for the load-bearing truth of who you are.
Exactly. You just can't unsee the blueprints once you've seen them.
Which is why encounters with this entity are rarely described as pleasant, I'm guessing.
Rarely pleasant, but they are almost always described as necessary. Some people find the transparency devastating, others find it incredibly intimate, and honestly, most experience both sensations in the exact same breath.
Given how overwhelming that forced transparency is, you aren't going to bump into an entity like this in aisle 4 of the grocery store on a random Tuesday.
No, definitely not.
You have to be in a very specific state. The sources point out that leucoid exists purely on the edges of our world.
The edges are their only natural habitat. The ancient texts identify several physical domains that mirror this psychological state. For example, there's the edge of the forest. The sources beautifully refer to this as the ecotone of the soul.
Ecotone.
Yeah, an ecotone is a biological term for a transition area between two biological communities where two ecosystems meet and integrate.
Oh, gotcha.
In this context, it's that precise, impossible line where the cultivated safe path stops and the wild darkness of the woods begins.
And it isn't just physical geography, right? There's the edge of sleep, too.
Yes, the hypnagogic corridor.
It's that weird, disjointed moment where you're half asleep and your mind starts throwing complete nonsense at you.
Absolutely.
You suddenly think, I really need to remind the toaster about the mortgage. And it's absolute gibberish, but for 3 seconds it feels profoundly true and logical.
That is the perfect example of a hypnagogic state. The rules of waking life are breaking down, but the rules of the dream haven't fully established themselves yet.
Right.
And we see this mirrored in time, too. The edge of seasons is a major domain for leucoid. Specifically, that unnamed period in late autumn where the year is clearly dying, the leaves are gone, but the weather hasn't fully committed to winter yet.
Ah, yeah.
Where the freezing cold is just a rumor on the wind, leucoid is native to that hesitation.
I love that framing. The god of the almost.
Yes, the god of the almost.
If you think about the physical tension of a held breath right before you exhale, or that dense, humming silence that falls over a room right after someone drops a massive bombshell in a conversation.
The silence of maximum density.
Exactly. It's not empty silence. It is packed to the brim with everything that hasn't happened yet.
All right.
And looking at how ancient people try to visualize this feeling, the physical descriptions of leukoid are wild. They translate that psychological tension into physical form.
They really do.
Sometimes they are described as impossibly tall, with joints that seem boneless, moving like dark, cold water.
And other times, traditions describe them as small, crouched, and completely still, like a stone.
Just a totally different vibe.
Completely. In those depictions, they have these deep, translucent gray-green eyes that look like high-altitude lakes right before they freeze solid, just watching, without judgment. Or sometimes, they don't have a shape at all, but are just a shift in the air, a quality of attention.
But why the boneless joints? Why the watery movements or the freezing lake eyes? What does that signify?
Those descriptions point to a critical difference between a boundary and a threshold. A boundary is static.
Okay.
Without the presence of this conceptual entity, a boundary is just a line on a map. A door is just a piece of wood. Deep water is just a physical hazard.
Just objects.
Right. But leukoid is the animating principle of the threshold. The watery, boneless descriptions represent fluidity, the inability to pin a transition down into a solid state.
So they are the action of crossing.
Yes. They are the reason your hand hesitates on a doorknob, feeling a sudden pulse of anticipation or dread. They transform a simple boundary line into a meaningful crossing.
So if their entire purpose is transforming boundaries into profound crossings, it makes sense that they act as a patron to people who are forced to cross life's most difficult thresholds. But you can't exactly go to a temple, light a candle, and ask a fluid, boneless water entity for a good harvest or job promotion. How do humans actually interact with them?
You can't bargain with them because bargaining requires a currency, and you can't bargain with a being that deals only in what is already true.
So, offerings wouldn't work.
Offerings are useless. What draws leukoid is genuine exposure. They appear when a person is standing at the edge of themselves with absolutely nothing performative left in the tank.
Which explains the people they are drawn to.
Yes.
The 3 a.m. wakers, people staring at the ceiling when the house is completely quiet and the mind has nowhere to hide.
Exactly.
Or artists working in the dead of night before the social world wakes up and demands they follow the commercial rules of their craft. Or children before they learn how to perform for adults.
All perfect examples of that unmasked state.
But the one that really caught my attention was their connection to the grieving.
The grieving are perhaps the most profound example of living in a liminal space. For those in deep grief, reality fundamentally fractures.
It really does.
It often feels like the normal world is a stage set, and everyone around them is just an actor reading lines about trivial things while they are suddenly wandering backstage seeing all the scaffolding.
Because the script of normal life is just gone for them.
Completely gone.
And the sources say leukoid sits with them as company in that backstage area, validating that what they are experiencing is real perception, not pathology.
Yes.
But I have to stop you there and push back on this a bit.
Okay, go ahead.
Because everything we are discussing, sitting with the dying, sitting with the grieving, hanging out in the cold, dying dark of late autumn, stripping away the ego that's just the Grim Reaper with a different PR strategy.
It sounds like it, I know.
How is this not just a god of death?
That is the most common trap people fall into when studying these traditions. But the philosophy highlights a massive distinction.
Okay.
Leukoid is not the god of death. A god of death is concerned with the final transition, the actual literal crossing from living to not living, the cutting of the thread. Leukoid is the god of what death knows, that the living constantly forget.
Wait, what does death know that we forget?
That the self is not a permanent structure.
Oh.
The identity you've spent decades building, your name, your wounds, your political preferences, your history, your anxieties, it's just a temporary coherence.
A temporary coherence.
Yes, it is merely a shape that matter and energy have taken for a short period of time and will eventually release. Think of it like a weather pattern.
Like a storm.
Exactly. A storm is real, you can feel the rain and wind, but it isn't permanent. It's just energy taking a form for a while. Leukoid experiences the human self changing with the same matter-of-factness that we experience the weather changing.
So the frantic clinging to our identity, our insistence that we shouldn't ever change or fade, that's our problem. That's a human neurosis, not a cosmic rule.
Exactly. The release of that identity isn't the end of something real, it's the return of something real, to a condition of greater reality.
That is a massive paradigm shift.
It really forces you to reevaluate everything.
And reading through the sources, this realization that the self is a temporary coherence, it scales up far beyond human psychology. In the oldest pre-civilizational stories mentioned in our dive today, this exact realization is the foundation of the entire cosmos.
It is. If we look at those whispered traditions, Leucoid predates everything in the cosmic order.
Right, before the forests had names.
Right, they were there before the maker gods, before the storm gods, before the concept of before you even had a name. They were simply the lucid emptiness that everything else was built inside of.
The narrative says the primordial mother passed through Leucoid as a door before she seeded the cosmos with life. And the detail that genuinely blew my mind, creation was not originally an act of love.
No, it wasn't.
We always hear that the universe was born out of a creator's love. But here, love came later. At its origin, creation was an act of lucidity.
Yes. The primordial mother looked into Leucoid's face, saw her absolute, unvarnished truth, and only from that cold self-seeing did she become capable of creation.
And Leucoid didn't demand any power, or a throne, or a cult of worshippers after acting as the mirror for the cosmos. They just went right back to the edge of the woods.
Back to the threshold.
But help me out with the phrasing these traditions use. Why is truth in Leucoid's world constantly described as cold?
Ah.
The sources keep repeating phrases like cold clarity or cold self-seeing. In most modern philosophies, finding your truth is described as warm, comforting, and empowering. Why is this truth freezing?
Because we have to understand Leucoid's grammar of truth. In this ancient context, truth isn't a moral category.
It's not about being good.
Right. It's not about righteousness or virtue or finding your bliss. Those are human concepts wrapped in layers of warmth and emotion and self-soothing. Truth here is simply defined as correspondence.
Correspondence, meaning what, practically?
It is the state where your inner reality and the outer reality match perfectly, without needing a story to mediate between them.
Oh, wow.
The thing itself and the name of the thing occupying the exact same space. No spin, no PR, no justifying your actions to yourself. Just what is.
The ultimate stress test of reality.
It's described as cold because it strips away all the comforting gauze we wrap around our lives to make them bearable.
Yeah.
It's not harsher than human truth, and it's certainly not kinder. It's just objectively truer. But the paradox is that this coldness actually provides the ultimate relief.
Because you stop fighting reality.
Exactly. When you strip away all the performance, you receive the permission to finally stop searching for yourself.
Because you realize the thing you are frantically looking for is exactly where you are already standing. That is incredible.
It really is profound.
To recap the journey we've been on today, we started by trying to wrap our heads around emptiness, not as a void, but as an act of presence, the canvas itself.
Right.
We explored what it means to step into the sovereign room of a threshold and confront the completely unmasked self, that raw, unassigned version of you that exists beneath the load-bearing walls of your public architecture. And finally, we zoomed all the way out to the cosmos to recognize that our carefully guarded identities are just a temporary coherence, a storm pattern that energy takes for a little while before naturally returning to a greater reality.
And for you listening, it's worth remembering that you don't need to go out and seek Leucoid through elaborate ceremonies or deep meditations.
You don't have to go find a haunted forest.
No, not at all. As the philosophy suggests, they are already inside the act of reaching. The next time you wake up in the middle of the night at that unnamed 3 a.m. hour, or the next time you stand at the edge of a massive life decision and feel that cold, clear knowing in your gut.
That prickle on the neck.
Exactly. Don't try to distract yourself from it. Recognize it as the awake emptiness finally noticing you. It's that ancient attention saying you are here.
And as we leave you today, I want to circle all the way back to that prickle on the back of your neck. That feeling of walking a familiar, everyday route, but suddenly feeling the artifice of it all. If the carefully constructed version of yourself that you present to the daylight world is just a temporary coherence, a mask meant to eventually be released, what happens to all the massive energy you spend desperately trying to protect it? And what could you possibly create if you decided to let that protection go today?